Today we're going to talk to Doug Nordman, who retired at 41 and lives in paradise, about how to raise financially savvy kids. Let's find out how Doug was able to retire so early and how he is teaching his daughter how to handle her finances. Welcome to Rich Your Soul, Doug. Thanks for being here today.
Hey, thanks for inviting me, Rocky. I've enjoyed listening to the other episodes of your podcast.
Thank you for listening. I didn't know you were a fan. I appreciate that.
I found it through Kathy Klein of Rocky Retirement. I recorded with her a few months ago.
I did as well. We met out at FinCon last year. She was a very nice lady, and it was great to have her on the show. So, you live in Hawaii. You retired at the age of 41. You haven't worked a job since that day. You start your day with the surf forecast, right? So, how does this happen? Would you create some internet company and strike it rich and retire away?
I wish I had, in retrospect, but I'm afraid that the answer is that I worked in the Navy in the submarine force, the U.S. Navy's submarine force, and I did 20 years of active duty there. The real difference, though, is that I had a high savings rate for 20 years. My spouse and I both, when we married, were stationed overseas, and we had learned to live fairly frugal lives, as you can imagine being on a ship. And we kept that up as long as we could. We always tried to save at least one of our paychecks, and that compounds when you invested aggressively. And we reached financial independence late in my career, around the late 1990s. I started my Navy career in 1982. And we didn't appreciate it at the time that we were financially independent. And by then I was a couple of years away from my military retirement. I retired in 2002, and I've got a pension that pays the basics. It pays the mortgage, the groceries, the utilities. And we've got our investments, our savings. It turns out, in retrospect, with what we know now about the 4% safe withdrawal rate and personal finance for early retirees, that we could have retired strictly on our investments and our savings. I would not even have needed the pension. So that's sort of the icing on top of the cake. It keeps me supplied with longboards.
Wow, that's impressive. It's always nice to see people who've had that kind of success. You said that you invested aggressively. What does that mean?
I'd like to say that we were brilliant investors, but sadly, that's not the case. We made all the typical mistakes of the 1980s and 1990s. We invested mostly in equity mutual funds. And that was what I mean by aggressive. That tends to make some people upset about volatility or concerned about losing money in the stock market. However, we had learned that when you're in the Navy and you're going to sea all the time, that you really don't have spare time to sit around and play with your investments. You might not even have had bandwidth or access to a telephone back in those days. So you learn to take your money, put it into an asset allocation, and leave it there and not mess with it, which worked out very well for us because we were not tempted to go in there and tinker with it or to try to pursue even higher returns. But we did have an asset allocation that was high in equities, and it was very volatile. But being in the military, we felt like we had pretty reliable income. That turned out to be very true, beyond our wildest dreams. And when we kept that up, that got us to our financial independence. Today, I wouldn't necessarily advise a high asset allocation in equities. I'd advise being comfortable with an asset allocation and educating yourself to understand what you're doing. But I will say that portfolios survive much better with an asset allocation that's at least 60 to 70% equities, if not higher. And that makes it easier to have the portfolio survive, even though there's greater volatility. You'll easily keep up with or exceed inflation, and your portfolio will last much longer. We made all the classic mistakes of investors in the 1980s and 1990s. And the thing that saved us was our high savings rate. A high savings rate makes up for everything else.
You know, it's interesting you say that. I guess when you're on a submarine, you don't, and back then there wasn't internet, so you didn't have access to your accounts. I think it was Fidelity actually did a study, and they wanted to see what was it that their most successful clients were doing that was giving them success. And what they found in the study is that their most successful clients didn't remember they had accounts. So they forgot, which comes back to the statement that if you set your asset allocation, you put the money in, and you forget about it, and you just let it be, you get the human emotion out of it, that's going to create success. It's going to prevent you from making the silly mistakes that cause you the problems.
Absolutely. And when I would go to sea, I would leave envelopes with somebody, trusted family member or my spouse. And every 2 weeks, she'd mail those envelopes into Fidelity. That was how we contributed to our savings and to our retirement accounts. And if Fidelity had ever had a problem or had to get a hold of me to talk about any of those envelopes, it would have taken them about 3 or 4 months until I picked up my mail again.
And so having that just steady thing works. And that's good to hear. I'm glad you've had success with that and it works. And it just shows that these things that we talk about are truthful and people do get success with that.
Well, you don't have to be a brilliant investor to reach financial independence, and I'm Exhibit A for that phenomenon.
And so I'm guessing then that the secret there is compound interest and how it continues to grow.
Absolutely. And humans, it turns out, don't really appreciate what an exponential growth curve looks like. It's very hard when you first start saving a high percentage of your income. It's very hard to see that growth. You put away 40 or 50% of your savings, you will reach financial independence in less than 20 years. But you don't really see that growth curve turn and have that sharp upward slope until about the 14th or 15th or even the 16th year. And the volatility between the time you start and the time you reach the point where you can really see the growth. That's difficult because, again, you begin to wonder if you're really doing this right. Maybe you should save less and spend on other things. Maybe you shouldn't have such a high asset allocation in equities. You can second guess yourself over and over and over again for at least the first 10 years before you really start to feel confident that this is going to work out.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that we talk about is once you hit that bend in the curve, it does grow exponentially. And if you wait, the longer you wait, the more you miss the end of that curve. So it's your last double. It's the double that takes you from 1 million to 2 million. And if you can get that second double, you go from 2 million to 4 million. But if you wait those 10 or 15 years, you lose those last two doubles, which is $3 million. So waiting is definitely not the way to go. And clearly, you've shown that starting early and just sticking with the plan allows you to have freedom at 41. And
absolutely.
Paradise.
And the analogy is that you live like a poor college student after you graduate from school and start your first career. The Navy makes it very easy to live like a poor college student.
That it does. And most people look back on college and they have fond memories. Clearly, the money isn't buying them happiness.
That's a very good point.
So let's switch gears here. I had you on today because we chatted about raising our kids and trying to figure out how to raise kids when you do have financial independence and wealth and making sure that you don't spoil them. You make sure that they're not entitled and also show them how to be wise with money. And that was one of the things that actually came up with Kathy Klein in Rock Your Retirement. She had said that most of her clients who left money, the money disappeared in 18 months. Ooh. And I don't want to spend a lifetime of working to leave it to a kid who's going to blow it all. Nor do I want a kid who shows up at my doorstep at 22 and expects me to support him because he can't figure out how to find his feet or live his life and handle money because we never taught him. And you got back to me. You wrote me a long email that talked a little bit about how you did it. And a lot of things I think are similar between what we do. And it's always nice to talk to other people, just as you mentioned, because it takes a long time and you don't know if you've done it right till 20 years later. And in the meantime, you've got to stick to the plan and hope that it's working out. So today I'd like to just share ideas of how we got started and what that outcome looks like 20 plus years later. You have a daughter, and when did you start teaching her about money?
We joke that we started teaching her about money as soon as she stopped putting it in her mouth. And that was about the age of 3 or 4 years. And she began to be aware that money could buy things.
And so did you give her money so she could buy things? What were the the actual logistics of doing that?
Well, let me talk a little bit first about the psychology behind teaching financial skills to a child. And the problem isn't so much the child as it is the parents. Kids will soak up whatever you teach them at that age, and they are voracious learners, and they really want to understand the world around them. But most of that is filtered through us parents. So if we have trouble with money, if we feel certain ways about money, or if we were raised with certain behaviors around money, it's all too easy for us to filter our teaching to our children through our experiences or our lack of experiences. And that can really flavor the way that the child learns about money for the first 20 years of their life. So the first thing that parents have to try to understand, this is not easy, but it's essential, is that they have to understand that the child is going to make mistakes with money, and there's going to be a lot of mistakes with money. We figured this out early on when we stumbled across a very good book by an author named David Owen. It's called The First National Bank of Dad. He's joking, but he says that when you give money to your kids and you're teaching them to manage money, that you have to mentally make an image of them running around the house, waving $20 bills in the air, lighting them on fire like 4th of July sparklers, and just completely blowing the money. If you can maintain that image of, I'm teaching my children how to manage money and they're going to make mistakes, then you'll probably work out okay. But if you're the sort of parent who feels that a child should carefully preserve money, put it away, never touch it, save it for college, do all those long-term goals that a child of that age just can't possibly appreciate, you're going to struggle to teach them the money skills. So for our daughter, we would start with showing her that money could buy things at the store. She would go grocery shopping with us every couple of weeks, and she'd see us putting things in a grocery cart, and then she'd see us paying for it at the register. And once she was old enough, we would give her some money. We called that the allowance, right? But initially, we started with giving her some money and telling her she could buy one special thing. And it was easy because she felt that quarters were very valuable back then. And so you could give her 3 quarters and she'd feel like the richest kid in the store. At that point, maybe she was. And she would buy her one special thing. And so that became a discussion about how you would get some money and you would spend some of it and you would save some of it. And every once in a while, you'd get more money and you'd learn to manage bigger and bigger pieces of money. And so as she grew older, she knew that her job was to learn how to handle bigger and bigger sums of money.
We did something similar, but a little bit different. You've brought up some great points, though, and I just want to reiterate them. Kids don't listen to what you say. They listen to what you do. So you've got to have your financial habits in order. You have to walk the walk because they've got the greatest hypocrisy meters built into them naturally. And they will call you out. Now, I will say we did do the long-term saving thing with the kid. When they were young, I would give them their age in their allowance. And so at 5 is about when we started. And we had certain rules. Out of the 5, $1 went to charity. So we were teaching them to give. And then the $4 that were left, we required them to split. $2 went to savings. And it went to savings for a time far into the future beyond college. And then the $2 was theirs to spend. So you had the immediacy of spending. You were planting the seeds for the long-term, savings plan.
Oh, yeah.
And essentially, we're teaching them to save half, which is how you got successful. You saved one paycheck.
Exactly.
And so that's what we did to kind of plant those seeds there and allow them to grow. The other thing is, it's when kids are young, and from what I've read, it's actually between about 5 and 12, that they create those money scripts within their mind, and that carries into adulthood. So if, as adults, we're not teaching them the right thing, or we're putting guilt around money, or we're telling them you can't afford this, you're dropping those scripts. They're going to carry them much, much later in life. Our behaviors are very important in this whole process.
I'm glad you said those behaviors are formed between the ages of 5 and 12. I'd like to think that we did the same thing with our daughter, but I could never really be sure that she wasn't just born to be a natural saver. But it makes a lot of sense that between the age of 5 and 12, she sees her people around her, mostly her parents, saving and investing, and she begins to do the same.
My kids are different. So my daughter was more so the natural saver. My son was the natural spender. And so when he got the money, he just wanted to go spend it. And it's amazing, though, when you give kids money and it's theirs and they walk into the store, they are much more likely to put the item back on the shelf. He would pick stuff up and he'd walk around the store. And when it was time to leave, I'm like, are you sure that's what you want to spend your money on? And he would think twice at 5 and 6 and say no, and he'd put it back.
We did a similar experience at Disneyland where the very first gift store our daughter walked into as a 5-year-old, she wanted to buy everything. And we realized we had never talked about the difference between shopping and buying. And we told her that we were going to be at Disneyland for 2 or 3 days. And for the first couple of days, she should just shop and go look at everything and think about it and look at her money and try to figure it out. And then the next day we would come back. And if she still felt like she wanted to buy it, then we would buy it.
And that's excellent. It's teaching the lessons. We were a little different than that in the sense that when my kids were young, we went to Disney a lot.
Yeah.
I would buy Disney toys at home and take them with us.
Ooh.
And I would give it to them when we got there so that I didn't have to spend $20 at the Disney store. I could spend $5.
Very smart.
But we told our kids and we would show them this. And I would always make those analogies for them. So we would constantly show them how if you're in a convenience store, something might be priced at one price. And if you can wait till we go to the grocery store, in half an hour, it's a different price.
Oh.
And at that point, eBay was big when my kids were little. And so I would show them, my son loved Pokemon cards. I'd show him, okay, at Target, they're one price for a 5-pack. You could buy a 20-pack, and that's another price. We could go on eBay, and you could buy 100 of them for the same price, but you got to wait 2 weeks because they got to ship. And, back then it was people. It wasn't all commercial like it is today. And over time, my spending son has become a non-spending kid. He hardly spends money anymore.
He knows how to look for the bargain.
He knows how to look for the bargain. He knows how to evaluate pricing. And the other thing we would do is when we'd watch TV and the commercials would come on for all the toys, we would watch them. And I'd look at the kids and go, you have that toy. Is it that much fun? And they'd be like, no. I go, exactly. I said, the whole purpose of that commercial is to take your money. They just want your money. And so they grew up with the idea that that's what it was. And so they learned to turn themselves off to advertising.
That's very valuable. I think being immune to advertising and understanding the psychology behind the advertising is a very powerful tool for a young adult. And if they haven't learned that tool as a child, then it's going to take them a lot longer as an adult to get a handle on it.
Absolutely. So now you started off with an allowance. And how did you build from there?
Well, we did the same thing, it sounds like, that you did with your family. We started off with $1 per week for your age. And so by the time she was 5 years old, she was getting $5 a week. One of the techniques we learned from the book, The First National Bank of Dad, was that David Owen would pay his kids interest at the Bank of Dad. So you could get your allowance from Dad and you could race off and spend it, or you could deposit some of that in the Bank of Dad. And he knew his kids weren't old enough to appreciate interest rates, let alone the Federal Reserve or the national economy. He kept it simple. He paid them 1 penny per dollar per month. Now, everybody would like to have a Bank of Dad that pays a 12% annual percentage yield on your CDs and has the highest guarantee that you'll be repaid whenever you want your money. And to the kids, knowing that they could get that much money for their dollars in the Bank of Dad, and knowing that they could get the money anytime they wanted it, was pretty much all it took for them to become early savers. And the reason was because if you look at the situation from the kid's perspective, your grandmother gives you a birthday present and she gives you, say, $20. And the first thing that happens when you're 7 years old is your parents confiscate all your birthday presents with money, and they tell you to lock it up somewhere for a couple of lifetimes in something called a college fund, and you never see it again. Now, if that's the way you're raised as a child, you know that the only appropriate response to that kind of arbitrary confiscation of your assets is for you to spend them as fast as you possibly can before somebody takes them away from you. So by letting our daughter get her allowance and then put some of that back into the bank of dad where it would earn interest, she began to understand very quickly that she could go spend her money on things, or she could leave her money in the bank of dad and save for something longer term. And we went through the Pokemon phase too. She knew that she could spend her money right away for a few Pokemon cards, or she could save up and she could go find a bargain at Goodwill or a garage sale or eBay, and then she'd be able to buy many more of them for a cheaper price with the money that she'd been saving. And that worked out very well.
That's awesome. We didn't do that, and probably looking back, I probably should have, so that they could understand how compounding works and how money grows when you save it. So that's a great idea. Now
that's David Owen teaching the parents how to teach their kids how to manage their money. But we also used subversive literature in the form of kids' books. And my favorite kids' book about money was a book called If You Made a Million. And the whole book shows what a million of something looks like and eventually works around to $1 million. And they do talk a little bit in there about putting your money away and saving it and earning interest on it. So as we were giving her one set of messages from the lessons we learned from our book for parenting, she was getting another set of messages on the same subject from her If You Made a Million book.
And so as you're learning, she's learning, which is good because it also teaches the kid how watching the parents go through the struggles and do that as well. I think that's important.
Oh, yeah.
I know some people have concerns about allowance versus making kids work for it. And it kind of becomes a question of how do you do it? We went strictly with the allowance because we wanted the money in their hands, and we didn't want the money to be seen like you'd get punished if you didn't do something. And the only way you can do that is to put money in their hands. So that's why we went with the allowance. Looking back, I think what we should have done was added a bonus onto it. And maybe you did the bonus, which is, all right, here's your allowance, but if you want more money, here are tasks you can do to earn more money. And I think you did do that, did you?
Right. I was the kid who was always worried about losing his allowance for his behavior. And that's a heck of a way to grow up as a 6-year-old. But in our family, we would tell our daughter that we would give her an allowance, and you got an allowance just for being a good member of the family. And then as she was older, we would say it wasn't just being a good member of the family, but it was also learning how to manage money. And we would tell her over and over as she grew older that we would eventually have her manage more and more money for longer periods of time. So she knew that she wasn't necessarily going to get a lot more money through her life, but she also knew that she'd be able to handle bigger and bigger sums as she got older. So you got your allowance for being a good member of the family. But if you wanted to buy something really expensive, or if you wanted to put a lot of money in the bank of dad, then you had to get a job. And so we always made sure there were jobs around. At the very least, she could do her regular chores. She always had chores to do, and those were something you also did as a member of the family. Once your chores were done, you could go out and earn money doing jobs. And a job might be something as simple initially as washing the car or trimming the grass at the edge of the lawn. And from there, she graduated to washing the entire car or changing the oil or mowing the lawn and doing the landscaping, whatever job we needed. And we graduated from there into doing other tasks like painting around the house, inside and outside the house, which is difficult for a child when they're younger, but you give them a small piece of the house to work with and you try not to criticize the way it turns out. And then as they grow older and they show more interest in certain types of skills, then you help them develop those skills and pay them money for it. It got to the point where our daughter turned out to be very interested in doing plumbing and electrical work. And so we would do projects when she was a teenager, and she would be paid for the quality of her work.
That's awesome. Because that was going to be the question I was going to ask you, is we shift to how they get when they get older. And in your case, it's a little different because you retired when she wasn't even a teenager.
Right.
And so mom and dad are essentially sitting around, and the kid sees all this money, and it's like, how do you build the habit to say, you're not going to get this when you're 18. You're going to have to go work for it. Like you missed.
We did.
Like we did. You missed. And I think that's one of the things, though, is we had kids a little bit older as well in our case. So they miss watching the struggle part. that parents might go through as they build wealth. I guess you did it by offering her opportunities, but that was going to be my question. How do you get a teenager to do stuff and to take initiative and work for it?
Well, it started with her when she was born. I was halfway through my career. She was born in 1992. At that point, I'd been in the Navy for 10 years, and my spouse, who's also active duty at the time, had been in the Navy for 9 years. And as she grew up, she began to see the Navy life around her. We always showed her our uniforms and showed her how to do things with the Navy and showed her what kind of places we were and what we did in the Navy. She actually transferred from one duty station to another a couple of times and had to learn how to pack all of her stuff into a box and put it on the truck, which is a very scary thing for a young child. But when we reached financial independence and when I retired from active duty, I was home all day on a home front. That's true. And she was 9.5 years old and just getting into that, what I like to call the danger zone of being a teenager. My wife was still working in the Navy Reserve, which is typically 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. So she was seeing us still work on things and projects. And plus, we'd already picked up other things of our own that we were working on. For example, I discovered my love of writing after I retired, and I started spending a lot of time writing. The important money lesson for her was to know that we had enough money in the budget to take care of our spending. And she also knew that we had to make that money last for the rest of our lives, but we might find other things we wanted to do. And the constant theme we told her was, if you want to spend that money, then you should have a really good job. And if you do have a really good job, it's a job that you love, and it's one that you're good at, and it's one that you save your money from. And then when you have enough money, you have choices. And if you like your really good job, you can keep doing it. But if you don't like that job anymore, then you can go find something else to do. And of course, as she got older, we started talking about families who had spent all their money and they were in debt and they didn't like their jobs, but they couldn't quit because they didn't have money and they didn't have choices. And that starts to play a script in a teenager's mind where they're happy with their allowance. They know they can get a minimum stipend and they can live on it if they want to. But they start to discover other things in life that they would rather have. And one of those things in her case, this was, again, the early 2000s, was a cell phone. And in retrospect, a cell phone today for kids is a valuable social tool. If you don't have a cell phone at school, then you miss out on the kids getting together for studying or working on projects. If you don't have the cell phone, then you miss out on the texts about the homework assignment or the change in the due date on a paper. Those are important things to have, and a kid's got to have access to a cell phone to network with their group and to form a good study team. But at the time, we didn't appreciate that. And so when she wanted a cell phone, we said, well, you probably should go get a really good job for that. And by the way, we need some cars washed. Here's some painting that needs to be done. Here's a lawn that needs to be mowed. And Dad needs some help with the next plumbing project. So she had a financial motive for her lifestyle. And she had plenty of opportunities to earn the money. And while she was earning the money, she was probably also learning things about working hard for your goals, or at least learning how to wire an electrical circuit. And so there was some learning going on, some mentoring, and she was seeing how you would have to struggle to get something to work. But once you got it to work, then you got paid for it and you learned something from it. So the next time you got paid for it, you probably earned a little bit more. I had to worry about being priced out of the market also. By the time she was 13 or 14 years old, we were paying her about $10 an hour for her labor, and she was doing a good job for that money. But she had also started doing a tutoring service that helped her learn more on math and reading. Now, on the mainland, it's probably something like Sylvan Learning Centers, but in Hawaii and in Asia, the tutoring service of Kumon is very big. And she'd been doing Kumon for a while, and she became aware that if she was 14 years old, she could get a job at Kumon. And she already knew she enjoyed working at Kumon as a student, and so she saw stepping up to become a Kumon teacher as the next big thing in her life. And so it worked out very well for us. She saw all those positive role models in the older teenage girls who were Kumon tutors. And when she got to the 14th birthday, she went down and got her work permit and started her part-time job the very next day.
That's amazing. And
I was very happy.
I'm sure you were. As I listen to that, there's an underlying thing that's going on here that I want to point out. You're having conversations with your daughter. You're having adult conversations, and you're teaching them adult skills, how to wire, how to do plumbing. I see a lot of parents who I think do the opposite. You're a kid, you can't do that, you're in the way. And they don't give them the opportunity and the freedom to learn those types of skills and to find out how to do those types of things, nor do they have the conversations. And I think that the core of everything is you've got to have conversations with your kids. And it comes back to what I said at the beginning. If you're a hypocrite about them, you're going to get called out. And that's why you see so many teenagers who are disrespectful to their parents. I think that's the reason why. You don't know the backstory, but it probably has a lot to do with that.
Well, you struck another chord there, because I was that teenager that was extremely disrespectful and had no appreciation for the work that my parents had put into raising me. I will point out, though, that the Navy, the military, makes it a very good learning environment for you to learn how to teach others. When you start out in the military as a junior enlisted, or in my case, I started out as an ensign who knew just enough to be really, really dangerous with a nuclear-powered submarine, you learn how to train somebody to let them go out and do things and discover how they learn and how they will improve their skills and master some tasks. But you also learn to set up the guardrails to make sure they can't accidentally damage any equipment or hurt anybody while they're at it. And so as our daughter grew, we learned a lot of the same training techniques that had been used on us when we were dangerous young junior officers. And admittedly, most of those techniques also work on somebody who's 8 or 9 years old, and it works very well for young teenagers.
So it begs the question, how much do you let them fail if you know that failing isn't going to cause harm?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I think every parent has to know where their child is likely to develop their skills and how much trouble they're likely to get into. And we would set things up to hopefully be reasonable enough that she would be interested in learning more and doing more, so that she could eventually get to the point where she felt like she was in charge of her own future or in charge of the task. I'll use electricity as an example. I would say that we would always work on that together, because if something was broken and you didn't know it, then it could really hurt you very badly. So she learned that if there was a problem somewhere with electricity, that she would come talk to me about it and we'd go look at it together. On the other hand, if she found a problem with plumbing, she might look at it and try to fix a leak. And then if it turned out to be something she couldn't handle, then she'd come talk to me. I don't mean to say that we had a plumbing problem or an electrical project in the house every day, but those were the types of things where she knew that something was dangerous. She had to go get help from a grown-up. But if it was just a little problem, then she might be able to work on a little bit and solve the problem herself without causing too much damage. Then she knew she could take care of that on herself before she would go get a grown-up to help her. And that conversation, as you say, it's being able to have that conversation. It's having the time and the mental energy and the bandwidth and the patience to work through that. That really helps a kid feel comfortable in coming to you to discuss these things with you. You have to keep those lines of communication open, especially when they're teenagers, no matter how frustrating it gets, to be able to make sure that they're on the right path and that they're not going too far into danger where they might get into trouble that they can't recover from.
And you have to give them the freedom to do it, which it sounds like you are constantly giving her the freedom within a safe space. I have a phrase for that. It's
safe space, yes.
Leaping with a parachute. You know,
exactly.
You can leap all you want. Just make sure you have a parachute so you don't slam into the ground. And it sounds like you created that atmosphere that she could do that multiple times over.
We would also talk about all the things that would happen in the Navy that would go bad. And we'd say, look, these are smart people and they know how to do their jobs. And they would start out doing it this way, and then something would happen. And then suddenly, how did they get there? How did things get so bad? What caused that problem? And we'd talk about that. We wouldn't necessarily try to teach her anything about it. We would just talk about how things didn't always go as you expected them to, and you had to recognize when things were getting out of control, and then you had to go talk to somebody and ask for help. And I guess at some point as a teenager, she felt comfortable enough that she would come talk to us and say, I have this friend. And we would have a conversation about that friend and their problems and how they were going to solve their problems. And I'm sure by the time she was 16 or 17 years old, she knew that we were doing teenage theater. But it worked for us, and it let us have a conversation, and it helped her solve a lot of problems.
Absolutely. And it comes down to telling them the stories, sharing what's going on in your world, and listening to what they have to say.
I have learned that if you talk to your kids about all the mistakes you made with alcohol and later on with sex when you were young and a teenager, that you totally deglamorize it. The idea of having to sit through another one of Dad's stories about drinking or chasing women was just so obnoxious to her that she made sure she never had to get a lecture about that ever in her life.
That's daring in a sense, We don't always want to show them we're infallible, do we?
Well, no, we don't, but we do want to show them that there are ways to get in trouble very fast, and you would never believe that your mom or your dad did this when they were your age.
Absolutely. And I'm close to my kids. I know most of their friends. And so as things come up and their friends behave certain ways, we have conversations. And so it's funny because now my kids, more so my daughter, comes back and she's, when you were young, you didn't let us do this. I'm thankful now because I see how you were protecting us from that. And as she's a teenager, she sees that more and more. And there's a separation that starts to happen from knowing what's right, doing what's right, and being able to just step away with courage and not worry about it.
Absolutely. And as they get older, they can handle more and more of that. But I've noticed also that they don't necessarily remember to thank you for all that wisdom and mentoring you've passed on to them until they're at least in their 20s and maybe until they have kids of their own.
Very true. So again, it's like that thing. You've got to keep taking those little baby steps, keep going down the thing, and eventually that curve turns. And when it does, it explodes and you reap boundless benefits from it.
We did learn that as she grew older that we would ramp up the amount of money she would get. And so the $5 a week worked great. When she got to her 8th birthday, we started talking about her 401k. Now, for a kid, this is a very hard concept to understand. But by then, she also knew that we were saving our money for our retirement, and we explained to her that this was her money for her retirement. And when she had her 8th birthday, we told her that she was going to start a 401k, and that if she saved her money in that 401k, that when she turned 16 years old, which at that point, it's a lifetime away, but when she was 16 years old, she'd have enough money in her kid's 401k to be able to buy a car. And we told her it wasn't going to be a big car or a really fancy car, but it was going to be a car that she could use to learn how to drive, to take with her to high school and go to college. And generally, we made it sound like something that only the really big and mature and responsible kids get to do. And behind the scenes, I worked on the spreadsheet to make the math work out so that by the time she did turn 16 years old, she would have that $5,000 that every teenager wants to be able to buy some kind of a car and pay for the gas and the insurance. And so that was the skill that she learned as a young child that got her up to the idea of saving money and saving for a very long-term goal. And then when she was in those years that everybody dreads when you're parenting a teen is when fashion and competitive possessions start with the other teens, we gave her more money to manage for her budget. We looked at what we'd been spending for clothing by that point, and we realized that she was spending about $400 every 6 months, mostly because she was growing like a weed, right? And so we'd have new shoes every couple of months and some new pants or some new T-shirts. You don't have to wear a lot of clothing in Hawaii, but on the other hand, when you're growing that fast, you buy a lot of new stuff from Goodwill and garage sales and occasionally a nice store. And so we gave her a $400 sum every 6 months for her clothing and her toiletries budget. And we told her that she could use that money any way she wanted. It was her money, but it would only be once every 6 months. And during that 6 months, she would have to make choices. She could either look really good or she could smell really good, but she might have to make some compromises to make those choices come together. And of course, there are inevitably mistakes at that age. They go out and spend most of their money on one really nice outfit before they realize that they're going to be wearing that outfit for most of the rest of the 6 months. Or they go out and they buy all the high-priced cosmetics or whatever you want to have that you use for your toiletries. And then they suddenly realize that's not going to last for 6 months. Just giving her that money to go out there and run her own version of a budget for 6-month increments gave her a lot more skills as a teenager at figuring out what the things were in life that she wanted to buy and how much she wanted to pay for them and what kind of lifestyle she wanted to lead.
Absolutely. It sounds like an excellent plan. I actually wrote a blog post. I think when my kid was 14, we actually opened up Roth IRAs for her.
Oh, fantastic.
And the blog post was basically about the compounding part of it. So by putting in, I think it was $1,000 right now, you would end up with $50,000 at 65. it showed her how the money grows over time and how just doing a little bit today creates much more for the future. Question: did you ever give your kid a credit card?
Well, we did. When she turned 13 years old, again, another major milestone in a child's life, we gave her an authorized user on my credit card. And we explained to her how you spend on a credit card and how it works. And we turned it over to her as much as we could. The reason we felt so confident at age 13 with turning a teenage girl loose with a credit card was because when she turned 9 years old, she was old enough to have her own checking account at our local credit union. And she had learned how to write down checks and pay with a check and run the balance and do all those things you have to do with a checking account. I'm not going to lie, there were some tears. She learned how to write neatly, and she learned that if you're too busy to write the numbers correctly, then it gets really hard to balance your checkbook. But eventually she discovered maintaining her accounts online with Quicken or with some other kind of software, and that got a lot better. She still would have struggles once in a while managing the receipts and balancing things, but by the time she was 13 years old, she was pretty much on the right track. And she was already showing the signs that she was going to be responsible with her credit card and manage it within her budget. Again, like you say, kids have a tremendous hypocrisy filter and detector, and they can tell when you're in trouble with your own finances. But she was well aware that we spent almost all of our budget on credit cards and that we paid off our bills every month, and we never carried a balance. We never paid interest on a credit card. So that worked out pretty well with her. And again, the nice thing about giving a credit card to a 13-year-old is they're going to make mistakes. And you want them to make those mistakes at home, where the penalties for failure are relatively minor compared to being able to be at college making those same mistakes as a teenager or a young adult and getting into much more trouble much more quickly before anybody notices there's a problem. So on one hand, she was demonstrating that she was pretty responsible with a credit card at the age of 13. On the other hand, I felt time pressure. I knew that she only had 4 or 5 years left to make all those mistakes at home before she'd be out there at college making them even better on her own.
So you were intentional. You thought forward and said, I know this may become an issue, and I'm going to intentionally do something about it younger and teach her how to handle life.
Not that I'd ever struggled myself with credit cards in college, you understand.
So we teach them the mistakes we make so that they don't have to make them. And hopefully they're smart enough. Side note here, in this entire conversation, I've noticed you've never once said, oh, it's the school's job to teach my kid about money.
I'll tell you a story about that.
Go ahead.
When you're retired in your 40s, one of the activities you pick up very quickly is going on field trips as a chaperone. And sometimes you're asked to volunteer in the library to help shelve the books, and other times you're asked to help around the campus with cleaning or painting or renovation projects. And after a while, the teachers notice that this one parent is always there for the kid on the field trip or the projects or in the library and volunteering a lot, spending a lot of time there. And they want to know why. And then they find out about financial independence. And it doesn't take long for you to understand the financial abilities of the teachers in the school and realize that they're not much more financially responsible as teachers at the school. They're not much more financially aware than any other average American. They just either never had the interest or they never had a chance to learn the skills. And so it became very apparent to me very early on that I was not going to turn over the financial education of our child to the school system.
I think that's something every parent needs to realize, is that it's your job to educate your child, and you need to be intentional with that and take control and not wait for someone else to do it.
I couldn't help her solve a partial differential equation, but I could certainly explain to her why her cash flow wasn't working out at the end of the month.
I don't think I've ever had to solve one of those equations after I left school. Have you?
No, I've never encountered one in the wild.
No, but every month I have to look at my cash flow. It's
yes.
Picking the right things to learn. My kids are in that teenage years right now, and so I'm looking forward as they get older. Your daughter is older now. So how did you handle things? Well, actually, that's a question. How did you pay for college? Whose responsibility was that?
It started with the eighth grade when she learned that people were going to want her to start thinking about college. And the school does a very good job of telling a child what they need to do to get ready for college. And sometimes they motivate the child with the things that they show them how to do. And other times they scare the heck out of a teen by making them feel like college is really scary and hard. They're going to have to do all these things to get into it. So we kept that conversation going at home and we talked about college. And at one point, we actually took a college tour, even though she was only finishing eighth grade. But we went to our alma mater and showed her around the campus and talked about college. And so she knew that someday she was going to go to college. And after all, how hard could college be? Mom and dad got through it. And if mom and dad could get through their college, she was more than ready to go to college by now. With that mindset, she began thinking about it. And we told her that we had enough money to take care of sending her to any state school that she wanted to go to, whether it was community college or straight to the University of Hawaii. We told her that if she got scholarships, then she could go to better schools. And I told her that it wasn't very important for her to focus on the money right now. What was really important was for her to find a college that she liked, where she felt like she fit in and where she felt like she could do a good job learning. And so as we started the college tours, we worked very hard to explain to her that she didn't need to make a decision right then, but she did need to see a few college campuses and talk with the teachers and talk with the other students and learn about college life and learn what questions to ask. And that worked out very well. We started doing that after ninth grade, and it sounds like a very young time to start a college tour. But again, I was looking down the road and I realized we're going to run out of time. One of the things that was going to cost us time was that after 10th grade, she was going to be old enough to go to driver's ed. If you take a teenager who can choose between driver's ed for their driver's license in a few months or a college education and doing college campus tours to project the rest of their life, they're probably going to choose driver's ed. So we did the college tours after ninth grade, and we managed to squeeze in some college campus visits in 10th grade around driver's ed and driving a car. But by the time she was a junior, she had a pretty good idea where she wanted to go. And it turned out that despite a lifetime of being raised by parents in the military, she thought that she wanted to join the military. And so we encouraged her to go to college campuses where there were Reserve Officer Training Corps programs, ROTC scholarships. And she applied for those during her junior year, and she did a good job. And so she actually won herself an ROTC scholarship, which pays all the tuition and all the fees and expenses, and then it leaves the room and board part up to the parents. So we told her that that worked out great. We really appreciated her taking care of that. And she was able to go to one of the nation's top engineering schools. That's her interest. She's a civil engineer today. And by doing that, she was able to afford going to the college. She knew she wouldn't have to take out any loans. And we told her that if she did a good job of taking care of the college fund while she was at college, that there would be profit sharing. We told her that we had been saving for college for a number of years, and she had done the hard work to get the good grades and to earn the scholarship. And by earning that scholarship and getting that college degree, that was great. But if she also took good care of the college fund, then after she graduated, there would be profit sharing. And so she's always looked forward to that financial incentive. I always tried to line up her goals with some fiscal motivation behind them. It wasn't, oh, you graduated, here's a present. It was, you did a good job. You learned what you needed to learn in college, and now you're starting your career. Here's some profit sharing from the good job you did at taking care of the college fund. So that worked out very well in her case, especially because she managed to get the ROTC scholarship. It's an interesting experience, though, because when you're in the military, many times you'll hear a joke about having to sign away your firstborn child if you don't take care of your gear or your people correctly. And yet, when she went to college, I literally had to sign over my firstborn child to the military.
I will say you're a lot more benevolent than I am. We've told our kids, if you're smart enough to go to college, you're smart enough to pay for it, and you're not allowed to have loans. We'll see how the process goes.
One thing we did do, there was significant anxiety during her sophomore year because the college campus wasn't big enough to house all the students. And so she was keenly aware that after sophomore year, there would be a lottery and she might be asked to move off campus to an apartment. And she was a little concerned about that because you have to spend money for an apartment, you have to run a budget, you have to do all these things that she wasn't sure she was ready to handle. And so we talked a lot about that during Christmas break of sophomore year. And one of the things we finally decided on after the discussions was that if she did get asked to move off campus, that instead of me paying the university the money for room and board, we decided that we would pay her the money for room and board. And we said that it would be enough that she could go out and live in an apartment by herself, but that she'd have to have a job to make enough money to afford that if she was going to be by herself. But if she brought in roommates and if she cooked her food in the kitchen instead of going out to eat, then she'd be able to have a budget where she could live off campus, just like all the other people that were juniors and seniors that have been asked to move off campus. And when I explained how the budget would work and what the numbers would look like, and we put together an idea, a spending plan, I said, look, if you're going to get this money at the beginning of the semester, this is $6,000 or $7,000 worth for your expenses of housing and food. Whatever's left over at the end of the semester, you can keep that money because I'd be paying it all to the college anyway. So whatever you can take care of as a college student, whatever you have left over at the end of the semester, that's yours to keep. And that's all it took. We lined her motives right up with ours. She immediately snagged 2 more roommates to live with in the off-campus apartment. She started looking at Pinterest every day and building up recipe ideas and shopping at the grocery store. And she would cook almost every meal in the apartment and then take it with her during the day to eat on a campus. She would eat at the campus cafeteria once or twice a week because she did have a certain number of meals, and sometimes you're tired and that's convenient. But once we had given her the fiscal incentive to save that money and to be responsible for it, she used all those frugality skills she'd learned as a teenager, and she kicked in and made sure she saved as much money as she could. It was a wonderful thing to watch.
Another amazing story. And I think that's the one thing with kids. If you give them money and you tell them they can keep the balance they don't spend, they're far less apt to spend the money. Whereas if they know they have to give back whatever's left, if they go to the movies and you hand them $20 and say, you can keep whatever's left, they're less likely to spend it all at the popcorn stand. They're more likely to be frugal on their own and be happy doing it because they know they get the balance for themselves.
And it's just like that as a grown-up. When you get paid by the corporation, you're going to be very careful with the money to make sure that you have enough food and housing at the end of the month. But if you're given the corporate credit card for a business trip, you might spend a little differently than you would if it was your very own money.
And I see people who do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's ingrained in me, so it doesn't matter whose money it is. I don't like to spend it. I always try to find the deal no matter what. I'm a little weird that way.
Well, especially if you're allowed to keep the money and put it towards some other goal or do something else for your work or your people or your lifestyle, that's a very powerful incentive, and it worked out great for her.
Very powerful. So now she's out of college, and how are you helping her now that she is on her own?
I've always felt a little pressure to be one step ahead of the outside world and how it's going to motivate people to behave financially. And when she graduated from college, she started her Navy career, and she's a naval officer today. She's been in the Navy almost 3 years. She's got 2 years left on her active duty obligation. And she's already decided that although she's enjoying driving surface ships and enjoys going to sea and doing the things that she does as a surface warfare officer, she's also learned that she doesn't want to do those things for much longer than her 5-year obligation. So she knows that at around 5 or 6 or 7 years of active duty, she's going to leave active duty and go transfer to the Navy Reserve. And she's got a great role model in her mother, who does that 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year when she was still in the reserves. And she understands a little bit about the reserves, and she understands a little bit about the transition. We're going to continue that conversation about how you leave military active duty and go to the reserves. Luckily, I wrote a book about it, so I've got some good ideas. But the other thing that I worry about is what the military does to encourage people to stay on active duty. And at the 5th year of service, just as she's thinking about leaving active duty for the reserves, the Navy will swoop in and offer bonus money. And you might have been reading some of this in the press about the Air Force and even the Marine Corps and the Army about giving bonuses to their officers to encourage them to stay on active duty. And it works the same way for certain enlisted skills as well. If you have technical skills as a soldier or an airman or a sailor, you'll get money to encourage you to stay on active duty. And in her case, the surface warfare community at the end of her 5th year will swoop in and offer her a bonus of $35,000 a year for 5 years if she stays on active duty. And when you're a 27-year-old lieutenant and you're being offered what effectively is a bonus of about 30% of your pay for 5 more years, That's a very powerful, we'll call it a bribe. It's legal, but it's a bribe. And if you don't have a lot of financial skills, or if you have a lot of debt, or if you lead a very consumeristic lifestyle, then that $35,000 seems like a fair price to pay for another 5 years of your life. But by now, our daughter has read books like The Millionaire Next Door and Your Money or Your Life and all the other personal finance publications out there that you and I have seen the authors of at FinCon and learned about years before. And so she's aware that that $35,000 costs some life energy and a commitment. And if you're challenged and fulfilled and you love active duty, then the $35,000 is really a bonus. But if you're not sure you want to stick around and you don't really feel the joy of being on active duty anymore, that $35,000 is really what some surface warfare officers refer to as blood money or a bribe. And so we've been telling her for several years about this bonus program, and she understands it's coming. And we said, we don't want you to feel like you're obligated to stick around. We want you to enjoy your work. And if you want to stick around, that's great. But we don't want you to feel like, oh my gosh, this is more money than I've ever seen in my life. So this is a big step, but it's one that we've been working for 20 years, ever since she stopped putting money in her mouth, and has to teach her how to handle big sums of money. My wife and I have been very fortunate. Our hard work has paid off beyond our wildest dreams. We've reached financial independence, and then I earned my pension, and then she's going to get a reserve pension from the Navy at 60 years of age. And all our assets have to do for the next few years is bridge that gap between my pension now and her reserve pension when she turns 60. So we know that we have a little extra money that we can use to continue this tutoring, if you will, this education of our daughter and help her make the right life choices. And so we've been telling her for the last few years that we're going to gift her money, and that money is the inheritance that she would get one day from us when she's far too old for it to make any difference to her life. And we said, well, we would like to give you some of your inheritance now when it's young enough to make a difference in your life, and also to teach you how to manage that money. We don't want to have that 20-something or 30-something person who gets that inheritance and immediately spends it within 18 months that Kathy Klein talks about. I hope in my daughter's age that she doesn't inherit anything from us until she's in her 70s, right? But I don't know. So we're gifting her some money now in her 20s, and it's enough money that she can maximize her contribution to her military version of the 401k. That's the thrift savings plan. It's enough money for her also maximize her contribution to her Roth IRA. And that's what we're telling her is, here's some of your inheritance now, put it in your retirement accounts so that you can reach financial independence in your 40s, just like mom and dad, and torture your kids the way you were tortured when you were growing up, watching mom and dad not have to go to work. And she can visualize that. She understands keenly what that lifestyle looks like, and she's totally motivated for it. And she also gets enough, the amount of money that she gets is also a little bit enough for her to handle any emergencies that she might have for her emergency fund. Because as a parent, you worry about a child buying a car that's unreliable or unsafe, and she's got a little extra cash after she maxes out her contributions to her thrift savings plan and to her Roth IRA. And so we've told her that this is to help her learn how to manage large sums of money, just like she's going to teach her kids one day. It's a little bit of an inheritance right now, and if she uses it now and takes good care of it now, then there'll be plenty left for her when she's older. But if she wastes it now, then it's gone. It's an inheritance. You don't get another try at it. And we've said that if we see signs of good financial behavior, then we'll continue to gift as long as it seems like a good idea to us. We're really not sure how long we'll do this, but we know that if we see signs of not so good financial behavior, then we'll stop doing it. If she buys a BMW tomorrow with the money that she's gifted from mom and dad, then we're probably not going to gift her any of her inheritance for a few more years. And we'll just keep trying again until we all get comfortable with it, figure out how to do it.
That's amazing. You must be very proud of her. It sounds like she's done all the right things and she's making all the right decisions. And
it's succeeded beyond my wildest dreams because I've been talking to her about this 40%, 50% savings rate for most of her teen years, and she understands how that works and how she can reach financial independence in her 40s. But sometimes your teenagers hear a more extreme version of what you're saying, or they interpret it way off to the end of the bell curve where you never expected they would go. And in our daughter's case, she graduated from college. We started the inheritance gifting to let her maximize her contributions to her retirement accounts. And then we found out that she was going even beyond that. She wasn't even counting the inheritance money as part of her assets. She was saving 40% to 50% of her ensign's paycheck while she was just starting out active duty, while she was making the deposits on her first house to rent from the landlord while she was on duty, while she was learning all those things you have to learn as an ensign. She was managing to save 40 to 50% of her paycheck. And that's very challenging. I mean, you talk about living like a poor college student. She was like living like a poor college freshman. Once we saw that behavior, which has continued most of the time up through today, we knew it was going to work out all right.
And is she happy?
That's the interesting thing. She is not only happy with her lifestyle, because she gets to go out and spend time with her friends and see places in the world that she never dreamed she'd see and do things that she never expected anybody to let her do. She also feels a tremendous sense of personal control over her future. She knows that she knows how to manage money. She knows that she can get some advice when she needs help. She knows that she can do the things she needs to do to reach financial independence on her own. Admittedly, getting some of your inheritance when you're in your 20s is going to greatly accelerate the process. But instead of her reaching financial independence on her own in her 40s or her 50s, she knows that that money that she's putting away in her retirement accounts might make this happen as early as her mid-30s. But we've also talked about the next step after financial independence. And again, she's seen her parents live this way for half her life. She understands that when you have enough money to live on for the rest of your life, if you're careful, that you still will probably find something you want to do. You'll probably still find work that you enjoy. Maybe it comes with a paycheck. Maybe it doesn't. Or maybe you have your own business and maybe you have earnings from that business. Or maybe not. Maybe you're just going surfing all day. But she feels a tremendous sense of personal control and self-empowerment by knowing that she can design her own lifestyle and stop living in fear of, should I sign up for this bonus? I might need the money someday. What am I going to do with my life? How am I ever going to retire? Instead, she knows that she can sit down and design her lifestyle to have just enough frugality and fun without crossing a line into deprivation. Admittedly, when you're in the military makes it very easy for you to figure out where the deprivation starts, and you may have to live with months of that, even years of that in the military. But she knows where that line is, and she knows what it takes to make her happy, content, and also to feel challenged and fulfilled.
And I think those are some important lessons. Everyone thinks money buys happiness, but that's not necessarily so. And the more you spend and the more debt you get in, the more it kind of becomes an anchor on you and it weighs you down. And when you don't have all of that, when you don't have all those ties and that anchor, you have the freedom to do whatever you want, however you want, under your own control. And it sounds like you've done a wonderful job of teaching her how to have that freedom.
As a retiree from the military with some assets under my control, I've started exploring the concept of angel investing, and I've learned that you really have to trust and like the founders of a startup company to be able to invest in what they're doing and to hope that they'll succeed and to give them the tools that they need to succeed. And this is one of the most impressive startups I've ever seen. Is my daughter is giving her the financial tools that she needs to set the course, design her life, and reach success.
And you've done a great job of that. And that's why I wanted you to come on the show and share that so that others can do that. Because this is not something that happens with a book or a course or in a moment. It was a 25-plus year journey here, and it takes time. And you have to keep just taking those small little steps, and it compounds over time, and the results are phenomenal.
Well, thank you, Rocky. I know it looks pretty good in retrospect. I will say that we still continue these conversations today. I still check in with her and ask her if she's feeling like she's losing her motivation, if she's catching affluenza because her mommy and daddy are giving her money, or if she feels like she's being a good steward of the resources that she's acquired because she's doing good work, and if she's going to be able to continue that. Warren Buffett has a very good biography out by a woman who's a very respected insurance analyst. One of the comments Buffett has made in the media many times is that you should give your kids enough that they can do anything, but not so much that they can do nothing. And I talk about that with her, and she's read that biography, and she understands the aspects.
Absolutely. There is that fine balance line there, and you have to make sure that you follow it. I think there's too many parents who don't, and they end up with kids in their basement at 30. And that's the last thing any of us want
exactly
to look forward to.
And she doesn't want that either. And she's making sure right now that she doesn't have to take care of her parents when she's older, to make sure that we still understand our finances when we're older. So that's the next thing, right? Your kids are going to manage your finances when you're older, and they might even choose your long-term care facility.
That is correct. So how you treat them when you're young is teaching them how they will treat you when you're old.
Yeah, payback, karma.
Payback is very much like that. Yes. Is there anything else that you would like to share today?
No, if readers want to learn more about how we did this, I talk about it on our site. And I've also written a book about military personal finance, about financial independence in the military. And again, it's been a very good thing that I got so interested in these subjects when I was raising our daughter, because now I get to use her as a test case and ask her what works and what doesn't. She gives me some of the best reader feedback I ever have had. And of course, she's also happy to help me work on the next book. So anybody that wants to learn more about this can go to our website. It's themilitaryguide.com. It's the-military-guide.com. I'll be honest, we've been doing this for 7 years now. So if you go to any search engine and type in the words The Military Guide or Military Personal Finance, you'll find the Military Guide on the first page of results.
If they want to get a hold of you, I'm sure there's an email on the website that they can contact you directly.
Absolutely. And I'll say it right here. It's nords@gmail.com. nords@gmail.com. I get a lot of reader email. I answer it all. So far, I'm still able to. The thing I get out of people's questions and emails is ideas on how to write the information better and to package it better for the next book. I love answering reader questions because it makes me understand what I'm showing them or explaining well enough that I can write a book about it and explain it to a whole new crowd of readers. So please contact me with questions. I'm happy to help. And the material that you share with me, the experiences you've had, the advice you give to me, that can end up right in the next book. I give all my writing revenue to military-friendly charities. So this is a nonprofit project. And by you giving me that information, that help, that support for writing the next book, then you'll also be able to give a vote on where the next batch of royalties goes from the book I publish and what charities we're going to give it to.
That's amazing. You're just so kind and wonderful to be able to do that. And I've met you in person, and you live your word. You're that kind of person who does give back and who is more than willing to help people.
Well, thanks, Rocky. I will point out for the skeptics and cynics in the crowd that I am explaining how to reach financial independence and have that money last for the rest of your life. And I want to make sure people understand that it doesn't start with buy my book. That's a nonprofit project. I've already got the money I need to live the lifestyle that I'm explaining.
Well, I think you told people to go to the library and get it.
I've put it in over 100 libraries around the world, and many of them are on military bases as well. And I ask readers, if you buy the paperback and when you're finished with it, please donate it to the library and pass it around.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for sharing. And I think what we'll have to do is find some very young parents so that they can get started at 2 and be able to help their kids. If they're 18 already, you're well past the curve. If you haven't been doing the work already, it's going to be a long struggle from here going forward.
The military knows what to do with an 18-year-old, but I'm not sure that's the right way to get the knowledge.
Well, that's also a choice, though, and it works. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me, Rocky. I really enjoyed the conversation.
So did I. Thanks for listening today. There are some amazing insights that Doug shared. If you need help with teaching your kids about finances or setting up your life for success, please reach out. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Email is rocky@richersoul.com. I also offer coaching services to walk by your side and help you achieve freedom, much the same way that Doug helped his daughter achieve success.